To output Google Maps with React, or to render a Google Maps driven map in React, you'll find plenty of packages if you search for React Google Maps. And you could absolutely use one of these packages. I will not do that though, but instead build my own basic custom map to show you how that would work behind the scenes, because I think that's really interesting to see and to learn. Now for this, in the shared UI elements folder here, let's add a new map.js file and a map.css file next to it. Now in the map.js file, we build a regular React component, of course by importing React from React, and then here our map component, which receives props, and then by exporting that map component, and then of course also import ./map.css. You can probably soon do that asleep. Now here, let's return a div. That div will be the host, so to say, for our map. And that div will receive a class name, which should be set dynamically. So I will, again, assign a default class of map, but then also offer the possibility of customizing this. You don't have to then use this possibility, but at least you could. I will also set style to props style so that you could also directly manipulate the inline styles, just adding some extra flexibility here, no matter if we use it or not. Now I want to render a map here with Google Maps, and for that we need the Google Maps SDK. So you can search for Google Maps JavaScript SDK and you'll find the official documentation. Now, first of all, we need to set up a project here and get an API key. We'll also later, by the way, in the Node.js module do the same, because there we'll need some other service from Google, and you can then later reuse the project you're about to set up here. To set up such a project, you need a Google account and click on Get Started. Now also, one important word here, for Google Maps and to use their tooling and their APIs and their SDKs, you need an account with a credit card. It's generally free to use, and you can search for Google Maps pricing to find their pricing information. You get $200 of free usage every month, which is a lot and which definitely suffices for what we're doing here in this course. But if you're using it in a real project, of course, you should definitely check which prices or which costs you can expect. And you also now need a credit card to continue and render a map. If you don't have one, of course, you could look into alternatives like Mapbox or simply render some dummy div with a background color here so that you can still continue with the course even if you're not seeing the map. Unfortunately, you need a credit card, not my rules, but Google's. Now here in this overlay, which you see on Google's page, check maps and also maybe places, because we'll need that later when we, in the Node.js module, also need a Google project and unlocked maps functionalities. Click continue thereafter, and now you have to select or create a project. There I will create a new project, which I'll name MERN. But you can pick any name you want here and click next. Now this will take a while and you'll have to confirm that this is the account you want to use for billing. As I mentioned, what we do in the course here will be possible for free, but definitely check the pricing if you're using it in a real project. Confirm this here. And after a while, the creation will be done. And you should see an overlay with your API key, which you will also need. If you're not seeing it, go to APIs and then click on Maps JavaScript API, Credentials. And this is the API key here, which you will soon need. Now, why do we need it? For that, search for Google Maps.js SDK again and go to their docs again, where we've been before. Here you'll learn how to render a map with Google Maps. And here you'll learn way more than what we will use in this course. So if you want to become a Google Maps expert and you want to use it in a lot of different ways in your next projects, these docs are the place to go. Now, one thing we need to do is we need to grab this script here and add this to our index.html file. There, let's say here at the bottom of body, but since it has async and defer on it, this doesn't really matter. So maybe also here in the head, we enter this script. And now here we need to inject our API key. So this API key I just mentioned, copy it, and then here replace your API key without the ampersand with your API key. But get rid of that callback init map thing here, so that you just have the script import ending with your API key. This will import the JavaScript package that helps you render Google Maps. With that, let's go back to our map.js file, because here we can now use this package which is added to our application. In there, in this component, we create a map with new window.google.maps.map. This is a constructor function which will now be available on the global window object in the end, thanks to this import we just added here. This SDK will be loaded and will add global variables on the window object, the Google variable to be precise, which then gives us access to the maps feature and there ultimately to the map constructor function. This now needs a pointer at an element, so in this case at this div, where the map should be rendered. Now to get this pointer in React world, we'll not use document getElementById and assign an ID to the div, even though that will also work, but we'll do it in a more elegant way. We can import useRef from React. This is another hook which we haven't used before. useRef can be used to create so-called references, which can be one of two things. We often use them to get a reference, a pointer at a real DOM node. That's one use case, a very prominent one. The other one is actually that with refs, we could also create variables which survive re-render cycles of our components and don't lose their value. But that's not what we need here. So all we do here is we create a map.ref constant by calling useRef, const. And then on the div here, we add a special prop, the ref prop, which React understands, where we point at the map.ref. And React does the rest and sets up a magic connection between this div and this constant, so that in this constant, we in the end store a pointer to this div. And now here, to this map constructor, we pass map.ref, though not like this. Instead, there we have a current prop, which holds this actual pointer which we need. So now we tell Google Maps where it should render the map. Now the map constructor here takes a second argument, which is an object where we can configure that map. Specifically, we can set a center and a zoom level. Now I want to make sure that both can be set from outside. So here I want to be able to use props center and props zoom, so that this is really controlled from outside this component. And now it would also be nice to render a marker at the center. And by the way, you can learn all that syntax here in the official Google Maps docs, in case you're wondering how I know all of that. So here to render a marker, I simply call new window.google.maps.marker, and to marker you pass in an object which has a position key, which should be props.center. And as a second argument, you pass in a map key, which should point at your map object, which you created before. So here, this map constant. This will create a new marker in the center of our map. Now with that, we have everything in place which we need to render a map. So let's now go back to the place item and import map from shared components UI elements map, like this, and render it here instead of h2 the map. Instead, we render our map here as a self-closing component. And now on this map, we have to provide this center prop, which should be props coordinates, and the zoom prop, which I'll set to a level of 16, which should work quite well. Now important, this coordinates prop here, right? This has to have a specific format. You find that in the official docs of the JavaScript SDK, of course. It has to be an object with a let and a lng key where both values are numbers. Now that's exactly what we have in our coordinates prop here, because in placeList, where I set the coordinates of a place item, I refer to place.location. And if we have a look at a place, there we do have a location property, which is exactly an object of that structure we need. If you created this in a different way, you definitely have to add some step to map it into the value Google Maps expects here. So into an object with a let and a lng key. And with that, let's save this and let's have a look. If I click view on map, this crashes. Now why is that? Well, this has something to do with some React internals. Let's have a look at the map component again. I rendered a map by using map.ref current here, right? And that uses our reference, which I said is magically set up with the help of React here to this div. Now, what's the problem here? When this component renders for the first time, which will in the end happen when we render our place item, then this is executed from top to bottom. We initialize our ref, but the connection has not yet been established because this part hasn't executed yet. And this is where the connection is established. So we just initialize the ref, but there is no connection yet. And in the very next step, I tried to render a map in that place, but the connection wasn't established yet. So this can't work because Google Maps can't find out where to render this. Now, thankfully, React has got us covered. We can import another important hook, the useEffect hook. I haven't covered it thus far, but it's a super important hook and we'll see it a lot throughout this course. useEffect allows us to register logic, a function, that should be executed when certain inputs change. So for example, here, we set up useEffect, and we set up the function that should run, and then as a second argument to useEffect, an array of dependencies of that function. And whenever one of the dependencies changes, then the function here will be re-executed. If we specify no dependencies, this will only execute once when the component is initially mounted and loaded, and never thereafter. So, now we can move our map creation and marker logic into this function we have in useEffect here. Now, with it moved in there, we should also be clear that center and zoom in the end are dependencies here. So I will use object destructuring again to get these two properties out of props, center and zoom. I do this so that I can add them as dependencies independently here, and I don't have to add the entire props object as a dependency, which could change more often than just center and zoom. So here in there, we just refer to center and zoom, therefore, in all these places. And now we have a useEffect function, which will rerun whenever the center or the zoom value, which is passed in from outside, changes. And again, that's just object destructuring, a default JavaScript feature, which pulls elements out of props, or which pulls keys and their values out of props, so out of this props object, and stores them in new constants. Now, how does this help us? Well, useEffect will run when this component first is rendered, because then center and zoom changed. They had no value before, now they have a value. But, and that's the important thing about useEffect and why it helps us here, it will run after JSX has been processed and rendered. So it will run in the first render cycle, but after the JSX code has been rendered. And that means this connection here will have been established by the time this code runs. And we take advantage of this. If we now save this, this reloads, and if I now click on View on Map, this works. I'm not seeing the map, so something is still wrong, but generally it works. We get no error. So let's now make sure we also see the map though, because that of course should be the case. And the reason why we don't see the map is simply missing styles. In our map component, I have that map class here, right, on the div. Well, in map CSS, we should add some styles here for this map class selector, and we should set width to 100% and height to 100%, so that the map is rendered in the entire container we provide to it. And if we now save this here, this already should work, otherwise reload, and now you should see that, and you got a Google map here, which you can scroll and move around and zoom in and out and really use like your normal Google Maps functionality. You can even switch to satellite mode if you wish to. So now we're rendering this, if we click on View on Map, in our standalone modal. And with that, we already achieved a lot here. And we're still far from done. We're not able to add places, authenticate is not working, and so on. So there's still a lot of missing work or a lot of missing functionality, but we will get there. This is a great step forward.